Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight, we venture into the forgotten places where the trees grow too quiet, where voices echo from beneath the ice, and where the dark does not follow the rules of nature. These are 5 true tales from the edge of the wild. Out here, the unknown doesn't need to chase you, it waits. And sometimes, it wears a face you recognize. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Hunter in the Ash Woods. I grew up in northern Minnesota, the kind of place where winters come early and the trees whisper when the wind moves just right. After my parents died in a highway accident when I was 8, I went to live with my grandfather in a faded blue cabin on the edge of the ash woods. He wasn't the warmest man, but he kept food on the table and taught me how to split firewood and track deer. Some nights, he would fall asleep in his chair with a bottle on the floor, but he always woke before sunrise to light the stove and boil coffee like nothing had happened. Life with him was quiet, predictable, and hard in a way that made you feel proud when things didn't fall apart. Our town was small, just a gas station, a diner, and a schoolhouse that still had a bell on the roof. Most kids moved away after graduation, but I never thought much beyond the next hunting season. My grandfather used to say, "You learn the woods like you learn people. You pay attention and you never turn your back on either." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But by the time I turned 16, it started to make sense. The woods didn't just give you meat and silence. They gave you lessons if you were willing to listen. Hunting became more than just survival for us. It was a kind of language, something only he and I shared. We had this old rifle he'd owned since the 60s, its wooden stock smoothed down by time and hands. He let me carry it the day I made my first clean shot on a buck. I still remember the way he clapped my shoulder like I'd crossed some invisible line into being useful. I guess all I ever really wanted was to be useful to him, and the woods made that possible. That fall, the cold arrived early. Frost clung to the porch steps before October was half over, and the birch leaves dropped fast, leaving the forest bare and brittle. My grandfather had been coughing more than usual, a dry, persistent bark that shook his frame. He claimed it was nothing, just the air turning. But he moved slower, took longer to get out of his chair, and his hands trembled slightly when he held his coffee. That morning, he didn't eat breakfast, just stared at the steam rising from his mug, eyes lost in thought. We were nearly out of meat, and the pantry was down to beans, potatoes, and a single jar of canned venison we'd been saving for deep winter. I saw how tired he looked as he pulled on his coat, heading out to check the woodpile, and I told him I'd go into the forest to hunt. He didn't argue, just nodded once and said, "Be careful." Something in his voice made me pause, but I didn't ask. I took the rifle and packed a piece of cornbread, a flask of water, and one of his old hunting knives. The forest behind our cabin was familiar, even comforting. I knew the deer trails, the mossy rock outcrops, and the small streams that froze early. I crossed the first ridge just as the sun began to rise, filtering through bare branches like stained glass. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional rustle of a squirrel or the distant call of a crow. I tracked a set of prints through the frost for over an hour, but they vanished near a grove of ash trees where the ground turned soft and dark. That's when I felt it. Not fear exactly, but a quiet shift in the air, like something had noticed me back. I stood still for a long time, staring into the ash grove. The trees here were older, taller, their trunks pale and smooth like bones. The ground felt oddly soft beneath my boots. It hadn't fully frozen, even with the cold. Scanned the tree line, the undergrowth, listening for movement. But nothing moved. Not a breeze, not a bird. It was like the forest had swallowed its own breath. I was about to turn back when I heard the crunch of leaves behind me, deliberate and slow. I spun around, rifle halfway raised. A man stood about 30 feet away. He was dressed for the woods, dark flannel jeans, heavy boots, but there was something off about the way he held himself. Too still, too calm. His face was pale, narrow, framed by short black hair that didn't quite match his weathered clothes. He looked like someone I almost recognized, like a faded photograph from a family album you forgot you had. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was low, steady, friendly. I didn't respond at first. Strangers didn't come this far into the woods, not unless they were lost or looking for something. "You out hunting?" he asked, taking a slow step forward. "Yeah," I said cautiously, keeping my finger near the trigger. He smiled faintly. "Used to come out here myself back in the day. These woods were different then. Quieter. Still good land, though." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. The way he looked at me was unsettling, not threatening exactly, but knowing. Like he was reading something in my face. "You're Jim's boy, ain't you?" he said. I felt my stomach tighten. Jim was my father's name. No one called him that around here anymore. He died almost a decade ago. "Who are you?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. Funny thing he said, "You walk far enough into the woods, sometimes you find pieces of yourself waiting." I took a step back. Every instinct I had screamed that something wasn't right. The stranger didn't follow. He just watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes, hands at his sides. "Tell your grandfather I said hello," he added, then turned and walked into the trees, his boots leaving no sound, no tracks. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore before I moved. When I finally turned to head home, the light had shifted. The woods felt wrong, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like they belonged to me. I moved fast on the way back, faster than I should have, with a loaded rifle slung across my chest. The air had grown colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. The forest, which had always felt familiar, now felt like a stranger wearing my friend's face. The trees were the same, but the silence was unnatural. No wind, no birds. Just the soft thud of my boots and the growing urgency in my chest. By the time I crested the final ridge and saw the cabin in the clearing, the sun was starting to dip behind the tree line. A strange dread settled in me the moment I noticed the front door swinging open slow and uneven in the wind. I froze. We never left it open. Never. I started to run. The yard was a mess. The wood pile had been knocked over. A window was shattered, shards of glass glittering in the dirt. My boots crunched as I stepped through them, calling out for my grandfather. No answer. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The table was overturned, one of the chairs snapped in half. The couch cushions had been ripped open, stuffing scattered across the floor. The old cabinet where we kept the ammo was empty, drawers pulled out and dropped. And then I saw him. He was lying beside the stove, one hand still clutching the handle of the cast iron door. Blood had soaked through the flannel on his chest. A lot of it. Too much. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, glassy and still. I dropped the rifle, fell to my knee, said his name over and over, but I already knew. He was gone. Something inside me shattered. I stumbled back outside and screamed until my voice cracked. The neighbors came running from down the road. Someone called the sheriff. I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket as the police moved around me, asked questions I barely heard. They said it was a robbery gone bad. Someone must have seen the smoke, known an old man lived alone. But that wasn't true. He wasn't alone. I was just too far away, too distracted, talking to a man in the woods who had no business knowing my name. The weeks after the funeral passed in a haze. I stayed with the miller's neighbors who took me in while the state figured out what to do with me. Eventually, an aunt from Wisconsin I barely remembered drove up and brought me back with her. I didn't speak much. Didn't eat much either. I kept thinking about the man in the woods, about how he'd known my father's name, known where I lived, known details no stranger ever should. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe a friend of my grandfather's playing some twisted game. But deep down, I didn't believe that. 6 months later, my aunt brought down an old box she found in the attic. It was full of photos and letters, all from before I was born. I dug through it half-heartedly until I saw one picture that stopped my breath. It was my father, much younger, standing beside a deer he'd hunted. His hair was shorter, but the face, the eyes were the same as the man I'd seen in the ash grove. The same coat, the same boots. I asked my aunt when the picture was taken. She said before my dad met my mom, before I was even thought of. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept staring at the photo, remembering how that man in the woods had looked at me. The way he'd said my grandfather's name, the way he distracted me kept me there just long enough. And suddenly I understood. If I hadn't stayed in those woods, if I'd gone home sooner, I might have died too. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe it? But every year when the leaves fall and the air turns sharp, I go back. I leave something small at the edge of those trees. And I say thank you. Just in case he's still listening. Story 2. The Eyes Beyond the Cornfield. I was never the father I promised myself I would be. When my daughter Ava was born, I swore I'd be better than my old man. He was the kind of drunk who never showed up, never called, and never apologized. I thought I could outrun that legacy, but the truth is, it caught up with me faster than I'd ever admit. I started drinking more after the layoffs at the mill. First, it was a few beers after work. Then it became whiskey. Then, it became routine. My wife Melissa begged me to talk to someone to find a program, but I always said I had it under control. I didn't. The night I missed Ava's school recital was a cold one in late October. I promised her I'd be there. She had practiced for weeks singing some fall-themed song in her tiny voice that cracked in the cutest way. She left a note for me on the kitchen table that morning with a drawing of us holding hands under a big yellow sun. I still have it creased and coffee-stained, tucked in the glove compartment of my truck. But instead of showing up like I said I would, I found myself on a bar stool at Kelly's Tavern, watching the same game I didn't care about, and drinking the same drink I always did. Melissa called me 3 times before I answered. Her voice was sharp, raw. She told me not to come home, said Ava cried when she looked out into the audience and didn't see me. I told her I'd walk. I said I needed air. I didn't even argue. That's how I ended up walking alone down a dark road that cut through the cornfields behind our neighborhood, the shortcut I hadn't taken in years. I was drunk, numb, ashamed. And as I passed the old grain silo that everyone said was haunted, I heard something call my name. In her voice, Ava's voice, from the field. I froze in place, one boot already sinking into the soft shoulder of the dirt road. The cornfield stretched out endlessly on either side, tall and dried out, their brittle stalks rustling slightly in the wind. But the air was too still for that kind of sound. My heart thudded once, then again faster. I told myself I was imagining it. Too much whiskey, too much guilt. But then I heard it again. Dad. It came from my left this time, just beyond the edge of the field. It was Ava's voice, high and soft, like when she called me from the backyard to push her on the swing. Except she wasn't here. She was supposed to be at home, probably in bed, tears still drying on her cheeks. I stepped toward the corn, my boots crunching the gravel. Maybe it was someone playing a trick, some neighborhood kid trying to scare drunks stumbling home. But no one knew I'd be coming this way. No one ever used this path anymore. I stood at the edge of the field listening. The voice called again, fainter this time, but clear. "Help me, Dad. Please." It sounded scared. My stomach twisted. I pushed through the first few rows of corn, the stalks scraping my arms and neck. I could barely see in the dark, but I kept walking my hand out like I could touch the voice. It moved ahead of me deeper into the field. The air smelled like old dirt and dry husks, but there was something else too. Something sour like rotting fruit or wet fur. I kept going anyway. I couldn't let her cry for help and do nothing. Not again. Not this time. And that's when I saw the shape crouched between the rows. Low to the ground, still, watching, waiting. At first I thought it was a scarecrow, maybe one that had fallen from its post. The figure was hunched low, knees bent in an unnatural angle, arms too long for its body. Its back was to me, head tilted forward like it was listening. The corn around it seemed to lean away, like the stalks themselves didn't want to be near it. I stood there in the dark, heart thudding in my ears, trying to convince myself I was just seeing things wrong. I squinted, took a small step closer. That's when it moved. Not suddenly, not like a startled animal. It shifted slow and deliberate, lifting its head just enough for me to see part of its face. Except it didn't have one. Not really. Where a nose and mouth should have been was just smooth skin like wax. But its eyes, God, its eyes. They were enormous and shining, not with light, but with wetness as if it had been crying. They were too human, too knowing. And they were locked onto me. Then it spoke again. Dad. That same small voice. But this time the sound didn't come from its mouth. It came from behind me, closer to my ear than it should have been. My breath caught. I turned instinctively, but there was no one there. Just rustling corn. When I turned back, the thing had stood up fully, and I could see it was at least 7 feet tall. Lanky, bone-thin, but somehow heavy-looking, like it carried weight that didn't belong to it. It took one step forward, and I backed up, nearly tripping over the uneven dirt. Another step. The voice came again. "Help me, Dad." Each time it spoke, it mimicked Ava's tone perfectly, except there was no warmth, no fear, just emptiness. It was like listening to someone rehearse love without understanding it. I started to run. Branches scraped my face as I crashed through the rows, no longer caring which direction I went. I could hear it behind me, not fast, but steady. A dry, dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy through gravel. I broke out of the cornfield onto the road, lungs burning, and didn't stop until I was under the nearest streetlight. Only then did I turn around. The field was still. But just beyond the edge, between two stalks, a pair of shining eyes watched me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just waited. I stood under the streetlight, bent over with my hands on my knees, lungs heaving like I'd run miles. My chest burned, and the whiskey felt like acid in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to keep running, to not look back, but I couldn't help it. I lifted my head, squinting into the dark line of corn where I'd just come from. The eyes were still there, unmoving, watching. I blinked, hoping they would vanish, but they didn't. And then slowly they began to rise higher and higher, until they hovered above the stalks themselves. It was standing fully upright again, and somehow it had gotten closer, just a few feet beyond the road. I stepped back under the light heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The thing didn't follow. It hovered there at the edge of the light, like the glow from the lamp was holding it back. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us blinking. Then it tilted its head to one side as if curious, and the voice came again. But this time, it didn't say anything. It only laughed. A hollow, broken sound that imitated Ava's giggle. But the cadence was wrong, stretched out and cracked in the middle like a recording played on warped tape. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, then turned and ran all the way home. I didn't care that Melissa had told me not to come back. I pounded on the door until she opened it, startled and wide-eyed. I must have looked insane, sweating pale, bleeding from a cut on my forehead I hadn't noticed. I didn't say a word. I just wrapped my arms around her and Ava, who was peeking from behind her mom's legs in her pajamas. She looked up at me, confused, and asked, "Daddy, why are you crying?" I didn't have an answer, because what I'd heard in that cornfield wasn't her. But it had known how to sound like her. And worse, it had known exactly where to hit me. Where I was weak, where I would listen. I stayed sober for weeks after that night. Poured every bottle I had down the drain the next morning and kept the porch light on every evening like it was some kind of ward against what I'd seen. I didn't go near the cornfields. Wouldn't even drive the back road that cut through them. I told myself it had been a hallucination, a mix of shame, alcohol, and exhaustion. But every time I closed my eyes, those pale eyes stared back at me, and that twisted laugh echoed in my skull. About a month later, I was helping Ava with her homework in the living room when she suddenly looked up and asked, "Daddy, who's that outside?" My stomach dropped. I followed her gaze to the window. Nothing was there. Just the dark yard and the edge of the trees beyond. I told her it was probably nothing, maybe a deer, and kissed the top of her head. But that night, after everyone was asleep, I stood by the same window watching, waiting. At around 3 in the morning, I saw it again. Not in the field this time. Closer. It stood just beyond the fence in the backyard. The same 2 tall frames, same awful stillness watching that house. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. It didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. It stood there until the porch light flickered back on. Then, as if it had never been there, it was gone. I still don't know what it is or what it wants, but I know it hasn't forgotten me. And worse, I don't think it was after me at all. I think it was trying to learn her voice. Perfect it. Be patient, so it can try again. Story 3. The Bell Ringer of Black Hollow. When I was 14, my parents sent me to spend the fall with my cousin Eli in Black Hollow, a sleepy Appalachian town nestled between 2 ridges and wrapped in fog half the year. They said I needed a break from the city time, away from the noise and my failing grades. I think they just didn't know what to do with me anymore. Eli's folks had a modest cabin tucked along a gravel road with a rust-colored metal roof and a porch that groaned under its own weight. The kind of place that smelled like pine wood and old books, where the radio still got more use than the television. The first night I got there, Eli warned me not to wander past the ridge behind the house. That ridge, he said, led to the old Black Hollow church. Nobody used it anymore. The windows were boarded up, the bell tower crumbling, and the path leading up to it was choked with weeds. But the church had one rule everyone in town still respected, even if they didn't admit it. If the bell rings, you go inside and stay inside. You don't ask why. You don't go looking. I laughed at the idea. A bell in a broken tower, ringing on its own, come on. But Eli was dead serious. He told me stories about the bell ringing during snowstorms or the night before a mining accident. said it always rang before something bad happened, and no one ever saw who rang it. Local legend had it that during the flu outbreak in the early 1900s, a preacher refused to abandon his congregation. He stayed behind ringing the bell every night to warn others away from the church even after most inside had died. One night the bell rang for hours, echoing through the hollow, until it finally stopped. When they found the preacher, he was cold and stiff, still clutching the rope. Since then, the bell had rung only when something dark came close. A week into my stay, the boredom started to wear on me. Eli was all right, but he spent most afternoons helping his dad repair fences or hauling firewood, and I wasn't much use at either. One cloudy Saturday, while he was busy stacking logs, I decided to sneak off and see the church for myself. I hadn't heard any bell. Nothing bad had happened. It was just an old building. I told myself something to break up the monotony. Besides, I didn't believe in ghost stories. I followed the overgrown trail behind the cabin, ducking under low branches and stepping over roots until the forest began to thin. That's when I saw it. The Black Hollow Church stood at the top of a small, rise stone wall streaked with moss and its windows boarded shut. The bell tower loomed overhead, cracked and sagging, but still holding the old iron bell like a dead tooth. It looked sad more than scary, forgotten. I walked around the side, kicking through leaves, half expecting some animal to jump out. Nothing did. I approached the front steps, then hesitated. A strange chill rolled through the air, raising goosebumps on my arms. I shook it off, reached for the rusted handle of the door, and gave it a tug. Locked. I turned away, disappointed. But just as I stepped off the porch, the bell rang. A single low note, long and heavy. I spun around, heart hammering, staring up at the tower. There was no one there. The rope hung still. The forest was silent again. And then it rang a second time. Slower, louder. I didn't wait for a third. I ran back down the trail branches, slapping my face, the sound of that bell chasing me all the way to the cabin. Eli was waiting on the porch when I burst through the tree line, gasping and pale. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing as he took one look at me. "You went up there, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My legs were shaking and my chest felt tight, not just from the sprint, but from something deeper. Fear I couldn't name. The bell I managed to say. It rang. Twice. His expression darkened. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Not the wind, not some animal." "No," I said. My voice cracked. It rang like someone was up there pulling the rope and then just stopped. Eli didn't say anything else. He stepped back inside and returned with his dad's old shotgun. We locked the doors that night and didn't speak much over dinner. I stared out the window long after the others had gone to bed, expecting to hear that sound again, half hoping it had all been in my head. But the woods were silent. The next morning, we found out someone had gone missing. An older man, Mr. Talbot, who lived alone in a cabin on the far edge of town. His dog had shown up outside the general store without him. The sheriff organized a small search party. Eli's dad joined, but we weren't allowed to go. That didn't stop us from listening. People whispered that this wasn't the first time someone had vanished after the bell rang. Most folks denied it, brushed it off. But I saw how they glanced at each other when they thought no one was looking. They knew, and they were scared. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. Around 2 a.m, I heard it again. Faint, distant, the bell. I sat up, heart pounding. Then a second ring. Eli appeared in the doorway of my room, already dressed, flashlight in hand. "We have to go," he said. "Someone else is going to disappear if we don't." I didn't argue. We slipped out into the cold night and climbed the ridge with shaking legs. The bell had stopped ringing by the time we reached the top. The church was dark, its outlines sharp against the starless sky. But just as we stepped into the clearing, the front door creaked open on its own, and the bell above let out one final deafening toll. The sound of the bell was so loud, it rattled in my chest deeper than anything I'd ever heard. Eli grabbed my arm and pulled me back, but I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the open church door, a black rectangle that looked like it led into something much larger than the building could possibly hold. The air around us dropped sharply, our breath visible in thick white clouds. The trees didn't move. No wind, no sound. Just the echo of that bell fading into a silence so complete, it made my ears ring. Then something stepped out of the doorway. At first I thought it was a man. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like an old preacher's coat, the hem brushing the ground. But its face wasn't right. Pale, featureless, like it had been scrubbed clean. Just a suggestion of eyes and no mouth at all. It moved with this smooth gliding motion, like its feet weren't touching the earth. Eli whispered a curse and backed up, but I was frozen. The figure turned toward us. It didn't make a sound, but I felt it speak. Not with words, but with something colder. A pressure in my skull. It felt like a warning, or maybe a memory too old to understand. It raised one hand, thin fingers outstretched toward the woods behind us. Then it vanished. No smoke, no sound. Just gone. Behind us, somewhere far below in the hollow, a scream cut through the silence. We ran. The descent back down the ridge felt longer than it should have. By the time we reached the cabin, Eli's dad was already suiting up. Another search party was being called. A young couple camping near the river hadn't come back. Their tent was found empty, fire still burning, no signs of struggle. No one mentioned the bell. But from that night on, whenever I passed that clearing, I knew the truth. The bell didn't summon danger. It warned of it. Whatever lived in that church wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to keep something worse away. Or maybe just give us time to hide. I left Black Hollow the following week. My parents came to pick me up early after hearing about the missing campers. They didn't ask questions when I told them I wanted to go home. I didn't tell them about the bell or the figure in the church. I wasn't sure I could explain it without sounding insane. Eli and I hugged awkwardly in the driveway, and as I climbed into the car, he said only one thing. If you ever hear it again, don't wait. Years passed. I went back to the city, finished school, tried to forget. But some things stick. The sound of that bell lived in the back of my mind, buried under traffic noise and college lectures. I told myself it had been a dream, a story swallowed by a strange little town. I even convinced myself I believed that. Until last fall. I was on a solo hiking trip in the Smokies, halfway through a remote trail just before dusk. The light was dimming, and the forest was quiet in that familiar, unnatural way. I had just set up camp when I heard it. One long, low note from a bell. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen, staring into the trees, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. But I packed up camp in less than 2 minutes and hiked through the night. I don't know how far the bell's warning reaches. Maybe the figure in the tower follows the ridges. Maybe it shows up when the earth is about to split just wide enough to let something slip through. All I know is when it rings, it is never by accident. And it is never late. Story 4. The Voice from Under the Ice. I was 9 the winter my parents sent me to stay with my grandparents in upstate New York. They lived in a quiet town tucked between snow-covered hills, the kind of place where the days ended early and the nights stretched long and silent. My parents said it was for my asthma that the cold air might do me some good, but I knew they needed space. They had been fighting a lot lately, and I had started pretending to be asleep just to avoid hearing them whisper argue across the hall. At my grandparents' place, things were calmer. The fireplace always crackled, the food was warm, and my grandpa told stories with a faraway look in his eyes, like he was remembering things he could never quite explain. Behind their house was an old summer camp that had been shut down years ago. In the warmer months, kids used to come from the city to canoe and hike and toast marshmallows over fire pits. But now it was December, and the place was abandoned, swallowed by snow and silence. Most of the cabins were boarded up, their paint peeling and roofs sagging. There was a small reservoir at the edge of the property, frozen over and covered in a clean sheet of white that hadn't been touched by footprints. I wasn't supposed to go there alone. My grandmother warned me more than once. That ice is old, she said. Thin in places. It remembers things. I didn't know what she meant by that, and I didn't ask. But the more I was told to stay away, the more I wanted to see it for myself. I had no friends in town, no school during the break, and a head full of questions. So one afternoon, while my grandparents napped, I bundled up in my coat and boots and walked down the hill toward the camp. The trees creaked softly above me. The lake waited in silence. The path to the reservoir was half buried in snow, but I followed the faint impression of an old trail crunching softly with each step. The cold stung my cheeks and turned my breath into clouds. When I reached the edge of the lake, I stood there for a long moment, staring out over the frozen surface. It was perfectly smooth, like a sheet of glass, dusted in powder. The trees on the other side stood dark and still, all their reflections barely visible in the dim afternoon light. I took a few cautious steps onto the ice. It didn't creak. It didn't shift. It held me. I wandered slowly, looking down at the frozen surface beneath my feet. In some spots, the ice was cloudy and pale, but in others, it was clear enough to see small air bubbles trapped deep below. I imagined them as whispers caught in time. That's when I heard it. A soft cry. It was faint, almost too quiet to register, but it was there. I stopped walking and held my breath. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then it came again, a muffled whimper like a child trying not to be heard. It seemed to rise up from beneath the ice. I crouched down, pressing my gloved hand to the surface. Nothing moved, but the sound came again, clearer now. A girl's voice. "Hello," she said, weak and scared. "Can you hear me?" I backed away, heart racing. It wasn't possible. There was no one out here. The camp was empty. The ice was thick. But the voice kept coming soft and trembling. "Please, help me. I'm down here." The worst part was it didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like someone I knew. I stood frozen, no pun intended, staring at the spot where the voice had come from. The wind had picked up, slightly brushing snow across the ice in thin, whispering patterns, but I barely noticed. My heart thudded in my chest, and my breath caught each time the voice returned. It called out again, soft and pleading, like it knew I was listening. "Please don't leave. I'm so cold. I'm so tired." I looked around the frozen lake. Empty. Still. There were no footprints except mine, no signs of anyone else, no holes in the ice, and yet the voice kept coming. I tried to tell myself it was an echo, maybe something carried on the wind. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I felt it. In my bones. This voice wasn't from the world above the ice. It was from something underneath. The next day I went back. I didn't tell my grandparents. I waited until they had gone into town for groceries, and bundled up again, trekking through the snow like I had the day before. When I reached the lake, I stood on the shore for a moment, half hoping nothing would happen. But as soon as I stepped onto the ice, the voice returned. It greeted me. "You came back," she said. "I was afraid you wouldn't." I crouched down, staring into the cloudy surface, trying to see something, anything. But the ice showed nothing but vague shapes and bubbles. I asked her name. There was a pause. Then softly she said, "I used to come here a long time ago. My brother and I. We weren't supposed to be near the water, but we liked the quiet. Then one day, he dared me to walk across the lake before it froze solid. I waited, holding my breath. I fell through. It was so cold. I screamed, but no one came. And then the ice closed over me. My stomach twisted. The voice was calm now, almost resigned. I asked how I could help her. She didn't answer at first. Then came a whisper so faint I leaned closer, pressing my hand to the ice. "Break it," she said. "Please." I stood up and took a step back, the cold suddenly deeper. I didn't know what was worse, that I believed her, or that I wanted to help. The next few days I couldn't stop thinking about her. I told myself it was just imagination, a trick of the cold and the silence. But the voice stayed with me. At night I dreamed of falling through black water, of a pale hand brushing against mine just before I woke. I didn't tell my grandparents. I didn't want them to think I was making things up. But each afternoon I found myself drawn back to the lake. On the fourth day, the voice changed. It wasn't pleading anymore. It was warmer, almost friendly. She asked me questions about my family, my school, my favorite things. And then she told me hers. Her name was Lily. She liked licorice and drawing cats and riding in the front seat of her dad's truck. Her brother's name was Matt. He was older and never said sorry. Her stories were sad, but familiar in a strange way. It felt like I had known her forever. That afternoon, I brought a hammer from the tool shed. I don't know why. I told myself I wouldn't use it. I just wanted to show her I cared. When I stepped onto the ice, she was waiting. "You came," she said. "I knew you would. I can feel the cold going away when you're near." I walked out to the center, to the spot where her voice was strongest. The ice was thinner here, I could tell. Cracks webbed out beneath my boots. I took out the hammer. My hands shook. I raised it, paused, and lowered it again. I was just a kid, but I wanted to help. I wanted to do something right. "Do it," she whispered. I raised the hammer again. A voice shouted behind me, a real one. "Stop!" I turned to see my grandfather on the edge of the lake, white-faced and running. I dropped the hammer, startled. It hit the ice with a loud crack. The voice below me screamed, not in fear, but in fury. A high, inhuman shriek that echoed through my skull. Then everything went silent, and the ice beneath my feet began to groan. My grandfather reached me just as the first crack spidered out beneath my boots. He grabbed my arm and yanked me back so hard I nearly dropped to the ice. We scrambled toward the edge, the frozen surface groaning louder with every step. Just before we reached the shore, I looked back, and for a split second I saw her. A pale, thin face beneath the ice eyes, wide and staring. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and her hands pressed against the underside of the frozen sheet, as if trying to claw her way through. Then the snow swirled, and she was gone. Back at the house, my grandfather didn't yell. He didn't even ask questions. He just lit a fire and made me drink hot tea with trembling hands. After a long silence, he said, "You heard her, didn't you?" I nodded. He stared into the flames. You're not the first. When I was a boy, I heard her too. He told me the story then about a girl named Lily who drowned in the reservoir over 50 years ago. Her brother dared her to cross too early in the season. No one found her body. They said the lake never gave it back. Over the years, others had heard her voice. Some believed it was a trapped soul. Others said it was something older using Lily's memory like bait. I never went back to the lake. But sometimes when the snow is thick and the nights stretch long, I hear crying outside my window. It's faint, almost like wind, but it always stops when I open the curtain. And once, just once, I swear I heard my own voice calling back. Story 5. The thing in the trail camera. I'd always been obsessed with wildlife. Not just the beauty of it, but the rhythm, the patterns, the silence between movements. I studied animal behavior in college, but classrooms never satisfied me. I wanted to be out there in the thick of it, far from phone towers and traffic lights. That's why I started setting up trail cameras. It became more than a hobby. It was a compulsion. I'd drive hours into the wilderness just to find a spot where no one had walked in months, set up motion-activated lenses, and wait. I tracked cougars in Montana, black bears in North Carolina, and once captured a gray wolf pack moving under a blood moon in Wyoming. That footage got shared around a few blogs, but it wasn't about fame. It was about the thrill of seeing what most people never do. Last October, I headed to Oregon. A friend of mine had tipped me off about a dense stretch of forest near the Cascades that was supposedly untouched private land, rarely visited, even by rangers. He'd gotten access through a surveyor contact. It was perfect, isolated, wild. I packed light, brought my tent, some basic supplies, and 6 of my best cameras. The plan was to stay for 5 days, set the cameras in a wide perimeter, check the footage each night, then recover everything at the end. Easy. I wanted to catch signs of a mountain lion a few hikers had rumored about. My expectations were low. Wild cats don't like to be seen. The first day went smoothly. I hiked and pitched camp by a stream and set up 3 cameras before dark. That night, under a clear sky, I listened to the rustling trees and distant owl calls and felt completely at peace. The second night, the footage changed everything. The next evening, after a quiet day setting up the remaining trail cameras along an old elk path, I returned to camp and lit a small fire. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that settles in your bones just after sunset. I ate a quick meal, then took out the memory card from the first camera I'd placed near the stream and slid it into my laptop. The screen lit up, and for the first few minutes, everything was normal. A fox trotting by, a pair of raccoons rummaging near the water. The kind of stuff I'd seen dozens of times. Then at around 3:12 a.m., the footage shifted. There was a shape, not an animal, not anything I recognized. It moved in from the edge of the frame, low to the ground at first, then rising slowly, unnaturally. Its form was blurry, like the lens couldn't quite focus on it. But it was tall, thin, no visible face. Just a smooth, dark figure standing in the distance, half shadowed by trees. The camera caught only a few seconds before it clicked off, triggered by motion, then back on a minute later. The thing was gone. I played the clip again, trying to adjust the contrast, zoom in. Nothing helped. The figure didn't look like a bear, not a cougar. Nothing about it matched anything I knew, and I knew a lot. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe fog. Something caught in motion blur. But something about it set my nerves on edge. I didn't sleep well that night. Every snapping twig outside the tent made my muscles tense. And before I drifted off, I thought I heard something breathing. not close, just nearby, watching, waiting. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was fatigue paranoia from being alone in the woods too long. I had done this before in even more remote areas and never had a problem. I hiked out to check the second and third cameras I'd placed deeper into the forest. The first showed nothing unusual, a few deer, some squirrels. But the third camera was different. At 2:46 a.m., it activated. At first, the footage looked empty, just trees swaying a raccoon darting across the trail. Then the screen flickered for a split second like interference. And when the image returned, that same figure was standing dead center in the frame. Closer this time, much closer. I paused the video. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, as if it were listening. Its body was elongated, almost stretched. No discernible features. No fur, no face. Just black rippling texture like wet bark. And then it moved, not walked, but shifted like a stutter in time. The footage glitched again, and it was suddenly gone. That night, I didn't start a fire. I sat in the tent with my back to the corner laptop in my lap, scanning frame by frame. Around midnight, I switched to live feed from one of the cameras still running outside camp. Static. Then the image settled. There it was, standing near the tree line. Far back but there, unmoving, watching. The feed cut out for 5 seconds. When it returned, the thing was 10 feet closer. I stopped breathing. Another blink of static. Closer. I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed the nearest flashlight, unzipping the tent just enough to peek outside. Nothing. Darkness and trees. But something shifted. A branch snapped to the left, another behind me. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found prints in the soft soil around my tent. Not animal tracks, not boots. Just deep impressions like something heavy had stood there and pressed into the earth. I checked the final camera that afternoon. It was the worst one yet. At 4:03 a.m., the footage began. The figure was there again, standing over my tent, looking down. No movement, no sound. Just watching me sleep. And I never even knew. I stared at the screen paralyzed. The footage was clear, no glitches this time. The thing stood just feet from my tent, its outline sharp in the moonlight. It didn't move. Not even a twitch. It just stood there for over 2 minutes, watching the tent from a distance that made my skin crawl. At one point, it tilted its head again, the same eerie motion I'd seen before. Then the footage ended abruptly, not from a timeout or low battery, but like something had reached out and shut the camera off. I felt sick. My hands shook as I packed the laptop and camera gear into my bag. I didn't want to wait until morning. I needed to get out now. But the sun was already setting, and the trail was difficult even in daylight. Still, I couldn't spend another night out here. I doused the fire pit, stuffed everything into my pack, and started down the trail with only my flashlight and a knife for comfort. The woods were too quiet. Even the birds had gone still. Every few steps I turned sure I was being followed, but saw nothing. Yet I felt it. That weight again. Like something just out of view watching from behind every tree. Then I found the camera I had strapped to the narrow cedar by the trail. It had been torn off the strap, shredded like it had been clawed. The lens was cracked. I checked the card anyway. No data, just static. That was when I heard the branches ahead shift loud, deliberate. Something stepped across the trail. I froze, flashlight shaking in my grip. The beam caught it for just a moment. Not its face, there wasn't one, but the shape, the outline. It was crouched now, almost insect-like limbs, 2 long fingers brushing the ground. It didn't charge. It just stayed there as if deciding what to do. I stepped back slowly, heart hammering, not daring to turn my back. And then it began to follow. I ran. Branches whipped my face and arms as I tore down the trail, not caring about direction anymore, just moving, putting space between me and that thing. I could hear it behind me. No roar, no heavy footfalls, just the sound of something sliding through the underbrush, too smooth, too fast. At some point, I lost the trail. My flashlight flickered, then died. I stumbled through the dark until I saw a faint orange glow between the trees. A highway. I burst out of the forest and into the light of a gas station sign like I was surfacing from underwater. A man filling his truck turned and stared. He must have looked insane, mud-covered, wide-eyed, shaking. I didn't stop to explain. I just collapsed by the pumps, sucking in cold air like it would save me. Eventually, I made it home. Told myself it was over. I deleted the footage, threw the cameras away. But it didn't stop. Because 2 weeks later, I got an email. No sender, no subject. Just a file attachment, a single video clip. I opened it without thinking. It was trail cam footage mine. But this time, it wasn't from Oregon. It was my backyard. The same tall figure stood beneath the oak tree, just behind my fence, perfectly still staring toward the house, toward my bedroom window. There was no movement, no sound. Just the grainy image and a timestamp from the night before. I moved the next day. But sometimes even now, I hear the soft click of a camera shutter in the dark. And I know it hasn't lost me. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.